Dr. Purcell, see if he is online.
What are you doing, Dad? Dad? What are you doing? Dad!
The film opens with Don rushing Maria and Sarah to the hospital. Sarah is frantically shouting at Don because Maria is struggling to breathe. Once they arrive, Don sternly instructs Sarah to stay calm. Inside the hospital, Maria's condition worsens as she loses her breath, and the doctors scramble to save her. The scene then flashes back 20 years before. Don's family is gathered for dinner, and Don expresses his gratitude for the meal his wife Irene has prepared. As they eat, Sarah tries to excuse herself to attend a party, but Don firmly instructs her to remain seated. Despite Sarah's claim that her mother gave her permission, Don denies her request and orders her back to her room. The once pleasant atmosphere turns tense, and even her mother, Irene, is powerless to intervene as Don's authority prevails. Meanwhile, Irene knocks on Sarah's bedroom door, but there's no response. Don arrives with a key and unlocks the room, only to find it empty. Sarah has already slipped out to the party with her boyfriend, Chris. Don's anger is enhanced as he realizes she's broken his strict rules. At the party, Sarah is enjoying herself, cherishing the moments with Chris, but when she returns home, she is met by her father, who demands an explanation for her disobedience. Frustrated with her father's rigid expectations, Sarah boldly declares that she plans to leave the house when she turns 18. The tension escalates until Irene rushes downstairs to defuse the situation. Overwhelmed, Sarah retreats to her bedroom, slamming the door behind her. The next day, Sarah is chatting with her sister Amy when their mother, Irene, joins them. Irene informs Sarah that she's only grounded for a week, but Sarah seems unhappy. She announces her plan to leave home, travel the world, starting with a trip to Florida where she intends to find a job. Irene, supportive of Sarah's aspirations, encourages her to follow her dreams, reminding her to stay in touch and visit often. However, Don overhears the conversation from the doorway. Furious about Sarah's plans, Don retreats to the basement, where he contemplates his next move. Hidden within the basement is a secret room that only he knows about. Later, as Irene prepares to leave for the store, she invites Sarah to join her, but Sarah, busy in a phone call with Chris, declines. Seizing the opportunity, Don asks Sarah to help him with something in the basement. Trusting him, Sarah agrees, only to be led into the secret room. Once inside, Don locks her in. The room is soundproof, ensuring that no one will hear her cries for help. That night, Irene frantically contacts all of Sarah's friends, but no one has seen her. Growing increasingly concerned, she insists on calling the police, despite Don's attempts to reassure her that Sarah is fine. Ignoring his dismissive response, Irene orders Amy to call Chris, and she proceeds to contact the police. On the fourth day, Don checks on Sarah in the secret room. Desperate, Sarah attempts to fight back and escape, but the heavy locked door thwarts her efforts. Don shoves her back inside, coldly informing her that from now on, everything she does will be under his control. He warns that if she disobeys 3 times, it will automatically cut off the power and the ventilation system. With a chilling resolve, he then forces himself on her. Meanwhile, Irene is providing the detective with all the details she can about Sarah's disappearance. Don, trying to downplay the situation, suggests that Sarah simply broke a promise and ran off. Irene, however, pleads with the detective, insisting that Sarah wouldn't leave without notice, especially not before her 18th birthday. Despite Irene's concerns, the detective remains unconvinced, swayed by Don's deceptive explanations. Chris comes by to check on Sarah, but Don deceives him, saying that she's in Florida with a man named Steve, an old friend from first grade. Trusting Don's story, Chris leaves, unaware that Sarah is suffering in the secret room, heartbroken over their shattered plans to go to Florida together. Sarah endures 21 days in the basement's hidden room, and on her birthday, Don brings her a cake and a set of red dresses, offering her a choice. She asks for a clock, but when he refuses to let her out, he forces himself on her once again. Desperate, Sarah attempts to fight back, but Don easily overpowers her, slamming her against the wall and continuing to exploit her. Nearly a year later, Sarah unexpectedly goes into labor and gives birth to a daughter, Marie. Don treats Sarah as his second wife, ordering Sarah to fulfill his demands in their confined space. 4 years pass, and Marie grows older, while Sarah becomes pregnant with a second child. Hoping for some mercy, Sarah pleads with Don, telling him that soon they will be 3 and asking if he would finally let them out. But Don coldly denies her request, leaving them trapped in the secret room. Sarah's hope fades, realizing she remains under his cruel control. Irene suggests to Don that they hire a private investigator, but he vehemently refuses, reminding her that they wasted $5,000 the last time. In a fit of anger, he throws his fork down and coldly reminds Irene that they still have a daughter before storming out. Meanwhile, Don brings a television to the secret room for Sarah and Marie. Marie, who has never seen the outside world, is excited by it. When Marie falls ill with a high fever, Sarah pleads with Don to bring a doctor. He dismissively tells her to manage it on her own by reminding her as a mother. Fortunately, Marie recovers, and one night as they lie in bed, Sarah shares the story of her and Chris with Marie, clinging to a glimmer of hope for the future. Unexpectedly, Chris visits Sarah's family home and runs into her older sister, Amy. During their conversation, Chris mentions the name Steve, which prompts Amy to clarify that they haven't seen Sarah since she disappeared. She confides in Chris that she suspects their father, Don, had something to do with Sarah's disappearance, revealing her deep distrust of him. Back in the secret room, Marie becomes increasingly restless, disturbed by the glimpses of parks and the outside world she sees on television. Sarah does her best to soothe her daughter's emotions, trying to keep her spirits up. She plays with Marie and her young son Michael, all the while hiding the harsh reality of their situation and maintaining a fragile hope that she might one day get them out. Irene is devastated when she knows that Don lied to Chris about Sarah. Confronting him, she demands to know why he would deceive Chris, leading to a heated argument. Amy, supporting her mother, sides with Irene, further intensifying the tension. Determined to take matters into her own hands, Irene declares that she will hire a private investigator herself and, in a fit of frustration, begins throwing things around the house. In the chaos, Don tries to calm Irene down, but in his distraction, he leaves his keys on the sofa. Seizing the opportunity, Amy grabs the keys and sneaks down to the basement, her suspicions about Don growing stronger. However, Don catches her in the act, snatching the keys from her and ordering her to leave the basement immediately. Sometime later, Sarah gives birth to her third child, a boy named Thomas. Desperate to give him a chance at a better life, she convinces Don to abandon Thomas by leaving him upstairs at her mother's door, promising Don that she will be more compliant if he agrees. Irene is stunned when she finds a letter and the baby left on her doorstep. As she brings Thomas inside, a flicker of hope reignites in her heart. She believes that Sarah might still be alive. Meanwhile, Don continues to feign ignorance, pretending to know nothing about the mysterious arrival of the baby. Sarah attempts to slip an emergency note with the baby, but Don discovers it. Furious, he confronts her, telling her she hasn't learned her lesson. He then cruelly orders her to put on the red dress, before once again taking advantage of her. Later, Marie experiments with makeup, catching Don's attention. He seems oddly pleased, but Sarah quickly steps in, urging Marie to stay away from him. She sternly tells Don to leave Maria alone, reminding him that she's just a kid. Marie, feeling isolated and lonely, confides in her mother, expressing how much she misses having friends and the outside world. Sarah, though heartbroken, gently encourages her daughter to remain patient, assuring her that things will eventually get better. Sarah spent the entire night digging at the wall with a spoon, taking advantage of the rainy weather that had weakened the structure. After making some progress, she attempted to signal for help, using a flashlight. A neighbor noticed the unusual flashing and, concerned, approached Don to inform him that he had seen a signal coming from the house. In a fit of rage, Don storms into the room and kicks Sarah in the stomach, stopping only when her children scream at him. The brutal assault causes Sarah to lose her fourth child, and she hands the lifeless baby over to Don. He coldly buries the child in the backyard, where no one can see him. Don then tries to manipulate Marie and Michael, planting the idea that they are trapped in the secret room because of Sarah's actions. Michael, furious, lashes out at Don, but Sarah quickly intervenes, apologizing to Don to prevent the situation from escalating further. Her submission angers Marie and Michael, who feel betrayed and confused by their mother's actions. Overwhelmed by her children's misunderstanding and the hopelessness of their situation, Sarah loses control, throwing everything in the room in a fit of despair before collapsing in tears. After seeing their mother's breakdown, Marie and Michael quietly clean up the room, putting things back in order. Realizing her children are old enough to understand, Sarah decides to tell them the truth. She reveals that the stories she told were about herself, explaining that she once lived upstairs before being imprisoned in the basement. The revelation is too much for Marie, who suffers an asthma attack upon hearing the truth. Meanwhile, Don mocks Sarah's appearance, further humiliating her. This time, Michael can no longer hold back his emotions and yells at Don, even attempting to push him. Sarah holds Michael back, trying to protect him, but Don, furious, storms out of the room and punishes them by shutting off the power, plunging them into darkness. Don loses his job, and Irene is furious as they realize they have no money left in the bank, putting them in a precarious situation. To make matters worse, Don receives a foreclosure notice, threatening their property. In a desperate and dark move, Don sets up a pipe to channel car smoke into the secret room, intending to harm Sarah and the children. Just as he's about to carry out his plan, Thomas unexpectedly approaches and asks what Don is doing, unaware of the danger. After a brief conversation, Thomas hugs Don, unknowingly interrupting his sinister plan. The car's smoke causes Marie to have a severe asthma attack, but Don's family is at an event in their own home, and he is delayed in checking on them. When he finally returns to the secret room later that night, he finds Marie gravely ill. Sarah, desperate, begs him to take Marie to the hospital, promising to stay silent about everything. Reluctantly, Don agrees, leaving Michael behind in the room. At the hospital, Marie's condition is critical, and she briefly loses her breath, but she miraculously recovers just in time. While Don is filling out contact information at the hospital, Sarah intentionally spills water on the paperwork. As Don stands to replace the form, he warns Sarah to stay put, but she seizes the moment and approaches a nurse, quietly asking for help. This leads to Don's arrest by the police. Sarah is finally reunited with her family, and her 3 children play together as she, her mother, and Amy watch over them. Unexpectedly, Chris arrives, surprising Sarah. The movie concludes with Sarah and Chris sitting together, reminding about the plans they once had. Then, Chris apologizes for not searching for her sooner and gives her a pink helmet, something he had planned to give her 20 years earlier.